when I want to emphasize specific parts of my presentation, but also the specific emotion I want my audience to feel, whether it's anger, sadness, happiness, or excitement, I use the changes of my vocal tones to direct my audience not only to my key messages, but also to how I want them to feel. And that's exactly why, in this week's episode of Master Talk, I'm going to teach you how to manage your vocal tones in a way that gets your audience excited to listen to you. Hi everyone, I hope you're having a fantastic week. Brendan from Master Talk here, your go-to channel to mastering your talk. And on this week's episode of Master Talk, we're going to be covering probably one of the most challenging elements of public speaking and also your road to mastering your talk: managing vocal tones. So let's get into it. The thing I want to focus on before even talking about vocal tones is this video is not for you if you did not watch my video on obsessing about your audience and the pitch video I did about me presenting a full presentation. I will tell you right now, the reason why vocal tones, specifically this skill, is impossible to master and very difficult for even the best polished speakers in the world is because of their level of obsessiveness of their audience is too low. They don't think about their audience enough to even consider trying vocal tonalities in their presentation. So my big ask for you is watch those two videos that I will link in the description below, and then only once you're done watching those, dare to watch this one. And then you will be on your way to mastering your talk, or else you won't understand a single thing in this video. So with that caveat and that disclaimer said, let's get into it. Number one, the first thing that I want to focus on is the three types of speaking tones that people generally have in my road to mastering them. So let's go through them. So the first one is called speaking tone, as I call it. Speaking tone is simply the voice that you usually use when you speak in public or when you speak to people at a coffee shop, right? That bravado or that sort of voice that you have has a certain amount of level, range, and ability for others to listen to. So let's say, for example, you're someone who's very quiet, like this, and you have a much lower volume, then it's important to understand the way that you speak so that you can vary your tone after that. Another thing that I like to do is have people who are very intense and who aren't afraid to tell you if your voice does not sound like people want to hear it. For example, in my situation, when I started practicing vocal tones, which was the hardest thing I probably ever did in public speaking, I realized from my friends that at the beginning I had a very, very aggressive tone. Like, I didn't want to persuade you of my attention. I wanted to demand it. I would speak very, very loudly, like I'm doing right now in this example, and it would scare off some of my audience, right? But this is something that I needed a strong accountability partner who wasn't afraid to tell me what I was doing wrong. So I spent endless hours presenting so that I could reduce my level of anger in presentations so that I can be more smoother and have a voice that sounds like honey, that you want to listen to it. In that regard, the first step to mastering vocal tones is to first understand how you speak regularly and then figuring out after how you can fluctuate them. Because if your foundation is wrong, like if your foundation is very angry like me or very soft that no one can hear you, then you need to figure out a way that balances the way that you speak in general. So you need to start with that foundation. The next thing I want to cover is the two other types of speaking tones: high tones and low tones, and what their general purpose are. So in high tones is more for optimistic scenarios. So let's say you're very excited to present something, you want to focus on the future of technology, you want to focus on a future state or a future situation that's very exciting for the company, the organization, or the person you're talking to. Then I generally want to use high tones to show that I'm really excited to talk about my solution or what I'm doing. But the opposite is also true. When I use low tones, when I'm talking about things that are maybe a bit sad, maybe are a bit frightening, maybe something very important that you need to listen to change, then in those situations, those are much more somber. But it doesn't necessarily mean one fits into the other, right? That you necessarily have to do that to be a high tone or a low tone speaker, or in that way that you fluctuate your tones. If you're an introvert, for example, and your general speaking tone is very low and quiet, if you use somber tones or low tones specifically, in those types of examples, you're actually emphasizing the same important elements as you would have if you had really high tones in the way I'm just demonstrating to you right now. Let's use an example to better understand this. Given that you've watched the pitch video, if not, please do before moving forward with this video, you'll notice in the presentation 2 parts. The first one is when I explain the recommendation to my audience, which I call STAR. So I'll redo it for you really quickly. As long as you never forget that every single employee in your organization is a star, you'll always succeed. But the thing I want to focus on in that specific part of my presentation is, why did I make the decision? Yes, why did I make the decision to use high tones? The thing that low and high tones have in common is that they are both artificially woven into my presentation. I choose to use high tones in that specific part. I choose to use low tones in another part of my presentation. I make those choices before I even step into the presentation room. And this is why vocal tones are impossible to master if you are not obsessed with your audience, because you won't make the effort to specifically choose the parts of your presentation where you put in low tones and high tones. So let's go back to the initial discussion. Why did I choose to use high tones when I presented STAR? And the main reason was because of the judges who watched my presentation. HR judges, so employees who are in human resources, for the most part, even if I'm generalizing, this is just the truth because I've been to so many of these competitions, they're full of life. They're very loud. They love energy, but most of all, they love people. So the best way to speak to them is not by talking about employees in the organization with a low tone, but rather mirroring the energy that they have towards not only the people that they discuss to or talk to, but also the passion they have for the people in their organization. The way I relate to them, the way I make them say, wow, Brendan gets me, Brendan understands my business and he knows who I am, is not through presenting STAR like this. As long as you never forget that every single employee in your organization is a star, you'll always succeed. But rather like this. As long as you never forget that every single employee in your organization is a star, you'll always succeed. The point I want to drive here, everyone, and this is why I'm so good at public speaking, is that is just one moment, one sentence of a 20-minute presentation. In the same way, I just analyzed why I use high tones for that specific sentence. You will be shocked to know that I use the same analysis for every single sentence that I present in any pitch. Every single one. Every single moment, every single sentence, every single word I use, I choose. And I understand whether I use high tones or low tones. So with that in mind, and with all of this together, what is my final takeaway for you to understand about vocal tones? That takeaway is simple. The first step to managing vocal tones is understanding how you speak. And then after you understand how you speak, then you could figure out how to fluctuate your tones. The next thing is to be so obsessive about your audience and who you're presenting to that you know when to weave in high tones and low tones into your presentations. The third thing, which is obvious, is to then test it. When I started presenting HR presentations, I used my coaches as my sounding board for my actual judges. So if if the presentation coaches, the people who coach me on day to day, look at me and they say, this makes a lot of sense. I really understand. Brendan gets me. He understands me. Then I'll know the judges at the competition will love me because the people who are coaching me also work in HR. But if they say something like, I don't really understand what you're trying to say here, I don't really get it, then I'm lost too. I lose them too, the judges that I present to. In the same way that I start my pitch video, please watch it, I don't start with, Michael is an employee at Vitality Health, he loves his job. No, HR people love people. They love the people in the organization. So instead I start with something like, Michael is a loyal employee at Vitality Health. He loves his job, he loves to be there, but the best thing about him is he comes to work every day with a smile on his face. But then to show that Michael is having trouble and that there's an issue with the company, I then say, but Michael is worried. I don't use high tones, I use low tones. Michael is worried because he doesn't get valued for the work he does. That really speaks to the hearts of every single judge that watches me. And that is the why I am the master at what I do. And I master my craft in the way you're going to master yours. I know vocal tones is difficult. If you have any issues with this, you have any trouble, please, please, please comment below so that I can answer any specific questions you have about vocal tones. But I'll leave you off with this. Vocal tones is extremely challenging, but not for those who put in the work. If you master silences, master ums and ahs, and master obsessiveness about your audience, I believe that you'll be able to master your audience as well. And with that said, if you enjoyed this week's episode of MasterTalk, despite how difficult this week's concept was, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well to see more videos like this. And if there's one thing I'll leave you off with, it's this. If you know someone who's already really good at public speaking or is always talking in a very monotone fashion, be sure to send them this video so that they'll be not one, not two, but 100 steps closer to mastering their talk in a way that less than 1% of speakers I've talked to can master it. Take care, everyone. See you next week, and keep mastering your talk. Bye-bye.